you. You suck.
If you look at the Premier League table right now, there are still 4 teams that haven't won a game yet this season. Ipswich Town are the first, however they've also drawn 4 games and are a newly promoted side, so they're probably still pretty happy so far. Crystal Palace haven't, but were absolutely phenomenal last season and still have the best squad out of these 4 teams, so they probably aren't happy but also probably aren't worried. Southampton have one of the worst squads in the league and really need to change up their system and how they're approaching games because they're simply not good enough to be playing this possession style of football in the Premier League. And the final team is Wolves. Now, out of all of these teams long term, I think Wolves are in the worst position out of them all. I think there's a genuinely serious chance Wolves unfortunately do get relegated this season. And I think over the last few years this has been forming, this has been beginning to arise, so let's have a look today at why it's came to this and how Wolves can possibly fix themselves. So let's start off with who actually owns Wolves. Wolves are owned by a Chinese investment group known as the Fosun Group. Now, the Fosun Group actually bought Wolves in 2016. At the time, Wolves were in the Championship. This was when football in China was starting to really rise. So much so that the Chinese government, in an attempt to promote and encourage the development of football, was actually encouraging wealthy investors within its own country to go abroad and invest and buy clubs from around the world. Aston Villa and West Brom were also bought by Chinese groups, as well as Inter Milan. However, since 2016, the Chinese development of football has died a death, and Wolves have been left with owners that still have an interest in the club, still want the club to do well, but nowhere near as much as what they did time ago. So the next thing to do, let's look at Wolves' squad. Former number 1 and really solid goalkeeper over the past few years, Jose Sa, has now been benched for Sam Johnson. Wolves' defence is criminally weak. Matt Doherty is past it. Ryan Nouri is brilliant going forward but dreadful at the back. Craig Dawson looks past it. Santiago Bueno doesn't look like he's good enough for the Premier League. Yerson Mosquera is actually pretty solid, to be honest, but he's injured. Nelson Semedo is similar to Nouri, just can't defend. Totti's decent but nothing special, and Pedro Lima is far too young to be depended on. On paper their midfield is better, but not much better. Lemina's a decent midfielder, Traore is a squad player, Andre was brought in to be first team but doesn't look amazing. Yao Gomez is a decent player but he's too hot-headed, picks up too many cards for me. Tommy Doyle and Luke Cundle just aren't experienced enough to be relied upon, and Bellegarde is just pretty mid, to be honest. There's nothing that special about him. The attack, however, is where Wolves do actually look their best. Larsson and Cunha are Wolves' 2 best players by a mile, and the 2 of them actually look like really good Premier League players, not just like mid-table, really good Premier League players. Hwang Hee-chan is a very, very, very decent squad player. Sasa Kaladznic, I mean, no one really knows, he's been injured the whole time he's been here. Rodrigo Gomez, it's far too soon to guess. Pablo Sarabia has been decent for a few years but looks like he's slowing down. Gonzalo Guedes has never been able to hold a position in Wolves' team. And then Enzo Gonzalez and Carlos Forbes look like squad players for now. Next, let's take a look at some of Wolves' transfer windows. Let's go back to the 22-23 season, which was the last time I think Wolves were actually better in the transfer window in terms of coming ins to who left the club. In this season, Wolves did lose some decent players. Morgan Gibbs-White was sold, Leander Dendoncker, Willy Boly and Roman Saiz all left the club. However, Wolves brought in Matheus Nunes, Gonzalo Guedes, Nathan Collins, Yao Gomez, Sasa Kaladznic, Hwang Hee-chan, Mario Lemina, Pablo Sarabia, Craig Dawson and Babacar Traore. They also loaned in Matheus Cunha and Diego Costa. So don't get me wrong, that was actually a really good window for Wolves. And it was probably the last season that Wolves looked somewhat reliable. In the 23-24 season, however, this is where it all started to go downhill. There was so many big exoduses from the club without equally big players being brought in. Matheus Nunes was sold immediately one season after joining to Manchester City. Ruben Neves, their best player by a mile, left for Saudi. Nathan Collins was sold to another Premier League team just a year after signing. Former captain Connor Cody left to another soon-to-be Premier League side. Raul Jimenez left to another soon-to-be Premier League side. Adama Traore left to another Premier League side. And Daniel Podence was loaned out to Greece. Gonçalo Guedes was also loaned back out to Portugal after never being able to get in the team at all. But the signings coming into the club were nowhere near as good. Matt Doherty returned to the club from Atletico Madrid, Santiago Bueno was signed, as well as Bellegarde. None of these guys have really been anything special to the Wolves squad. The only really good addition was Matheus Cunha, but that was for a massive fee. And then this season, again, it's been similar in terms of the players leaving the club have had a much worse effect on the club compared to the players that's come in. Daniel Podence was sold officially to Saudi after falling out with the club. Current captain Max Kilman was sold to another Premier League club in West Ham. And Pedro Neto, one of Wolves' best players, was sold to Chelsea. And in terms of players coming into the club, it was nothing special. Yeah, Strand Larsen coming in was pretty good. It's on loan with a mandatory fee to sign, but he does look pretty good. Other than that, Tommy Doyle was bought on a permanent, Pedro Lima joined, Sam Johnson came in from Crystal Palace, Rodrigo Gomez from Braga and Andre from Fluminense. None of these guys are particularly special. They're not going to revolutionise the Wolves squad. Now, there is some good news for Wolves in all of this. Over the last few years, they have made a fortune in player sales. And it's led to believe that Wolves had some FFP troubles before they sort of started selling off a lot of players. By now, those FFP troubles have to be fixed. There's no way they can still be in trouble after the amount of players that they've sold. So how do we fix Wolves? How do we get Wolves to a position where they are a stable Premier League club again? Well, first things first, I think there's got to be 2 short-term goals and 1 long-term goal. The first short-term goal is, unfortunately, Gary O'Neill needs to be sacked from his position as Wolves manager.
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
He done them a real solid when he took the job after Lopetegui left just before last season started, and he done really well last season to not only keep Wolves up but actually finish pretty solidly. However, the fact that Wolves have lost 6 of their opening 7 games and their next game's Manchester City, so we can assume that will be 7 of their first 8, he's proving quite quickly that he's been caught out of his depth. So I think Gary O'Neill has to be removed from his position in the club, and Wolves need to appoint someone who's probably not an attractive choice. Wolves need to appoint a manager in mind who's going to build a squad. This doesn't need to be a manager who's going to take them further up the table in years to come and get into Europe and challenge for trophies. They just need to appoint a manager who they know is not going to get them relegated. Basically, if this was 10 years ago, I'd be saying it's time for Big Sam. Unfortunately, very few of those managers are still around. Really, the only one that's still there is Sean Dyche. I wouldn't see really any team getting relegated with Sean Dyche unless it was like a Southampton who just simply don't have the squad to compete. Unfortunately, I don't see Wolves getting Sean Dyche to leave Everton to sign for them. So in terms of who the next manager should be, I'll be honest, I don't have that answer. I really don't know. But one thing's for certain, they can't stick with O'Neill. Granted, he won't be, not really any manager that comes in will be able to do much against Manchester City, but in the long run, Wolves desperately need a change. The next short-term fix they need to figure out is to sort this defence out. Wolves have conceded 21 goals in 7 games. That is on average 3 goals a game they are conceding. Their defence is so light, and when you've got fullbacks like Semedo and Aït-Nouri who play every week, who are just so weak defensively, you're going to struggle to just consistently outscore everyone you're playing against. So I feel like that should be a big focus for O'Neill if he survives, or whoever takes the job after O'Neill, is Wolves have to get this defence sorted. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what else you do, you're going down. Wolves need to take a priority and a focus on having a surefire, hard to break down defence, because they actually have the quality going forward to make up for that being more of a defensive team. People like Cunha and Larsen can, pull some moments of magic from out of nowhere. Now, if they can do those 2 things and survive in the Premier League this season, the third thing Wolves need to do, and the more long-term ambition, Wolves need to drop the Portuguese shopping list. See, when Wolves first came up, they would sign so many Portuguese players and it worked amazingly for them. Not just Portuguese, but like, you know, Raul Jimenez was there as well, he was Mexican, you had some Spanish players in there, some Brazilians, but that kind of region, that kind of philosophy. It worked brilliantly for them at the time, it doesn't work anymore, it has to be forgotten about. You know, if you remember all the players that Wolves brought in when they first came up, Ruben Neves, Diogo Jota, Raul Jimenez, Adama Traore, João Moutinho, Raul Patricio. Wolves had so many phenomenal players. It felt like any Portuguese player they brought into the club would be phenomenal for them. Well, I'm sorry, the bubble's burst. It just doesn't work anymore. Wolves need to go back into the market and start looking for actual proper talent, not limiting themselves to that being just Portuguese, Brazilian and Spanish talent. Yes, those are three nations that produce a hell of a lot of talent, but you need to stop limiting yourself to just that. Because Wolves need to get back to a stage of being able to bring in, you know, good players and actually develop them in a system where players can develop, not just players that fit one system, one mould. Players of all different moulds and play styles can actually develop and be sold on for a profit, because that's the only way Wolves are going to survive long term. It's not necessarily that Wolves need the money, but they need the money coming into the club in order to be able to spend it. And that is one thing that Wolves have notoriously done better than most teams since 2016-17 when they were promoted. If you look at some of the sales they've had, it's been absolutely phenomenal. And again, as I covered earlier, in the last few years, the players they've sold, the money that they've made has been just fantastic. So that was just a short video talking about my opinions on where Wolves are at and how it would be possible to try and fix the club. So let me know in the comments below if you agree with anything I said or if you disagreed. I'd be interested to hear some other opinions on how we could fix this club, because I genuinely do believe that the Premier League is better having a team like Wolves in it. So thank you to everyone who's made it this far into the video, and I will see everyone next time.